In this video, I'm going to solve an example of reading comprehension set. This set was actually asked in one of the law entrance examinations. In the actual examination, you will be looking through the questions first to get a sense of what you are trying to identify from the passage. In this video, I'll be reading out the passage. You may pause the video to read it on your own. After that, I will be solving the questions one by one. You can always rewind the video to have a look at the passage in case you want to refer to it to solve a particular question. The passage. When talks come to how India has done for itself in 50 years of independence, the world has nothing but praise for our success in remaining a democracy. On other fronts, the applause is less loud. In absolute terms, India has not done too badly. Of course, life expectancy has increased. So has literacy. Industry, which was barely a fledgling, has grown tremendously. And as far as agriculture is concerned, India has been transformed from a country perpetually on the edge of starvation into a success story held up for others to emulate. But these are competitive times, when change is rapid, and to walk slowly when the rest of the world is running is almost as bad as standing still or walking backwards. Compared with large chunks of what was then the developing world, South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, China, and what was still lately a separate Hong Kong, India has fared abysmally. It began with a far better infrastructure than most of these countries had. It suffered hardly or not at all during the Second World War. It had advantages like an English-speaking elite, quality scientific manpower, including a Nobel laureate and others who could be ranked among the world's best, and excellent business acumen. Yet, today, when countries are ranked according to their global competitiveness, it is tiny Singapore that figures at the top. Hong Kong is an export powerhouse. So is Taiwan. If a symbol were needed of how far we have fallen back, note that while Korean Cielos are sold in India, no one in South Korea is rushing to buy an Indian car. The reasons list themselves. Topmost is economic isolationism. The government encouraged imports and encouraged self-sufficiency. Whatever the aim was, the result was the creation of a totally inefficient industry that failed to keep pace with global trends and therefore become absolutely uncompetitive. Only when the trade gates were opened a little did this become apparent. The years since then have been spent in merely trying to catch up. That the government actually sheltered its industrialists from foreign competition is a little strange, for in all other respects it operated under the conviction that businessmen were little more than crooks, who had to be prevented from entering the most important areas of the economy, who had to be hamstrung in as many ways as possible, who were to be tolerated in the same way as an inexcisable wart. The high expropriatory rate taxation, the licensing laws, the reservation of whole swaths of industry for the public sector, and the granting of monopolies to the public sector firms were the principal manifestations of this attitude. The government forgot that before wealth could be distributed, it had to be created. The government forgot that it itself could not create but only squander wealth. Some of the manifestations of the old attitude have changed. Tax rates have fallen. Licensing has been all but abolished. And the gates of global trade have been opened wide. But most of these changes were forced by circumstances, partly by the foreign exchange bankruptcy of 1991 and the recognition that the government could no longer muster the funds of support the public sector, leave alone expand it. Whether the attitude of the government itself or that of more than a handful of ministers has changed is open to question. In many other ways, however, the government has not changed one whit. Business still has to negotiate a welter of negotiations. Transparency is still a longer way off, and there is no exit policy. In defending the existing policy, politicians betray an inability to see beyond their noses. A no-exit policy for labor is equivalent to a no-entrance policy for new business. If one industry is not allowed to retrench labor, other industries will think 100 times before employing new labor. In other ways too, the government hurts industries. public sector monopolies like the Department of Telecommunications and Videsh Sanchar Nigam Limited made it possible for Indian business to operate only at a cost several times that of their counterparts abroad. The infrastructure is in a shambles, partly because it is unable to formulate a sufficiently remunerative policy for private business, and partly because it does not have the stomach to change market rates for services. After a burst of activity in the early 90s, the government is dragging its feet. At the rate it is going, it will be another 50 years before the government realizes that pro-business policy is the best pro-people policy. By then, of course, the world would have moved even farther ahead. End of passage. Now, if you have read this passage, the first sense that you get is that although it begins with somewhat praise, a lot of drawbacks have been pointed out and a lot of practical examples have actually been given and logically explained. So, what is the writer trying to do here? Is he trying to just bash a policy, or is he actually trying to logically work through a problem? Let's take a look at the questions. The first question, the writer's attitude towards the government. Like I mentioned, the first feeling that we get is that he's not trying to put down anything, but simply trying to logically point out the problems, and hence critical would be the best answer option for this particular question. Second question, India was in better condition than the other Asian nations because if you look at the first and the second passages, it shows what were the various reasons that India should have been ahead of the others. It clearly indicates that India never faced the ravages of the Second World War and also mentions about a large English-speaking population with good business sense. So, both A and B are clearly mentioned in the passage, so option D has to be the right answer to this particular question. The third question. According to the writer, India should have performed better than the other Asian nations because, well, we do not say that we have adequate infrastructure and definitely not the politicians taking required decisions. But the passage does mention that compared to the other Asian nations, we had better infrastructure. So option B has to be the right answer. The writer ends the passage on a note of, well, you read just the last line and it ends in a rather negative way. So, the best possible answer to be selected is obviously pessimism. Fifth, the writer is surprised at the government's attitudes towards its industrialists because, well, here when the word industrialist is mentioned, the word crook is also mentioned. Search for that particular line and you will see a contradiction that although the government looked upon industrialists as crooks, still the attitude did not betray this feeling that they had. So option 3, C, the government looked upon its industrialists as crooks is what we are looking for as the answer. The sixth question, according to the writer. Okay, now here we are not saying that Indian politicians are busy lining their pockets or not conversant with the need of the present scenario, but simply that the politicians do not have a proper view or vision for the country's requirements. So option A, clearly the right answer. Question 7. The government was compelled to open the economy because of the paucity of funds, because the foreign exchange bankruptcy. Clearly option C is indicated in the passage. 8th, the major reason for India's poor performance is the answer. Literally these words are given in the passage. Economic isolationism is clearly mentioned in the passage and obviously the right answer. The example of a Korean cello has been presented to highlight. Well, if you remember the example, A country's product is in B but vice versa not there. So clearly given to contrast that although we have their products, our products are not there. So it's about India's poor performance in the international market, option B.